Auckland adventures because it'll disrupt the flow. But I found myself in Northland, and when I arrived in Northland, I had one intended goal that I knew that was going to be in the book to begin with, and one that unfolded because of a very series of serendipitous events that ultimately ended actually concluding a full cycle that actually, oddly enough, ended not only in Fiordland, but with one of the people in this room tonight who actually hitchhiked, picked me up, and I had no idea that he was going to be here, so the serendipity of the journey having begun starts all over again. But one of the things I wanted to see was, including my book, bearing of course New Zealand's the real Middle Earth. I thought, well, we've got to have an end, you know, all the rings had an end, we've got to have an end. So I wanted to go and visit Tāne Mahuta, and I'd actually visited Tāne Mahuta about 10 years beforehand, and I'd done a very similar great adventure, epic hiking with the intention of seeing him. And on the last ride that picked me up, the gentleman that actually picked me up was a guy called Douglas Flavel. And Douglas was an 84-year-old wood chopper who had been on Christmas Island when they'd exploded the nuclear weapons in the 1950s. And Douglas turned around to me and he said, you know, my job was to basically be the aide-de-camp to this professor. We all thought that he was mad. We'd say to him in the morning, "Good morning, Professor," and he would say, "Ex-right Pythagoras," and we all shook our heads. And when the bomb went off, we were, never seen anything more spectacular in our life. And he took us into an office and he all poured us a drink and he said, "Man is upsetting the balance of nature. He will cause the seas to rise, he'll cause the temperature of the earth to increase, and he'll bring about a global extinction if we continue down this path." And we shook our heads and we all thought this guy was bloody nuts. And at this stage the vehicle was slowing down because it wasn't too far away to drop me off to Tāne Mahuta, and he said, "Look, I look pretty good on the outside, but I'm actually riddled with cancer, and most of my mates are dead that all died from cancer. There were 500 of us, and most of them were wiped out within 15-20 years of witnessing this nuclear bomb blow up. And a few of us that weren't, they're in the hospital, we go and visit them and we all have a good laugh and it's all there, yeah, bloody bloke, bloody copper, mate. And then we go out inside in the car park and we bawl our eyes out. And I've come to the conclusion that we used to think that professor was insane, but I've actually come to the conclusion that actually we're the insane ones. And it was at that point that Douglas actually dropped me off, and I was there face to face to have my great conversation with an ant. And all I can say is, trees don't say much, and especially ants, but when they do, you really want to bloody well listen. And that was sort of that shaped my mood when I went into Northland about what I wanted to kind of do, feature this whole story about the curry. I got up there and horrified to find that the swamp curry, which is over 50,000 years old, within 3 years, and this is when I say this from when I wrote this book in 2014, it will all be gone. It'll all be shipped off and it'll be in China. So within 3 years, what's been in the ground for 50,000 years will be gone. There will be no more curry trees, ancient curry swamp trees left in New Zealand. And there's another very gentleman guy, I won't pronounce his name, but he runs a documentary called The Song of the Curry Tree. And in The Song of the Curry Tree, he makes a suggestion that what we should be doing is actually growing the curry tree and using it to manufacture things like guitars because, and I'll explain why very shortly, the curry has an amazing harmonic which reaches chords that you can't with other woods, and it just blows musicians away. And it's an opportunity when someone gets up and plays a curry tree in San Francisco or Moscow or wherever to again say, this is from New Zealand. You can't get this from anywhere else in the world. So it's a chance to tell a unique New Zealand story and have a product which you can sell to a top tier market that you can't sell anywhere else. Unfortunately, the curry tree in New Zealand is dying of the dieback disease, and all the funding for it under this government has been cut. So again, while we've got to have a chance to actually save the curry and make it sustainable, we're actually going to let that get wasted and get blown away as well. But what I didn't realise, like all the way throughout the trip, I was having this sort of situation where I was following this whale tail, and I was a bit sneaky there. I left a bit of the tail over out because one of the things I also did on the west coast was I went and visited Pukenukuroa, who I did not find out to the very end of the trip. Pukenukuroa is the bones of the very first whale that the Wataha people followed to find New Zealand. And what they did was they would plant the atua tree in Polynesia, and when that tree flowered, they knew that's when the whales were coming. And when the whale arrived, they knew that by following the whale who had the currents, they were able to find this land that they knew existed actually out there. And in turn, what actually occurred was that, as I discovered from the very first person whose place I actually walked into, Kerry Strongman, who's a master carver, gave me a beautiful stick, all sorts of amazing gifts of knowledge. The curry is, when you turn around, you stick your head in the water, there's whales in the water, it actually makes the same sound as a whale, as the curry tree. And the whales actually use the curry as part of their GPS tracking to actually find their way to New Zealand. So again, if you chop down all the curry trees, you don't just disrupt the ecology on the land, you actually disrupt the ecology on the earth. And the most amazing thing is, and again, I'm keeping the story quite short, but if you ever actually turn around and get a chance to listen to the sound of Earth being recorded acoustically from space, it actually makes the same sound as a humpback whale, believe it or not. And in Maori mythology, the oldest Maori mythology has this wonderful love affair of basically arises that what occurred was the curry and the whale were in love with each other, but of course one's on the water and one's on the earth. And the whale, the curry had a vision of one day, the whale had a vision one day of these strange little monkeys floating on its good brother, the curry tree, and it was worried that the corrosive ocean of the ocean would tear it away. It would. So what he did was he gave the skin of the humpback whale, he gave to the curry tree, and in return, the curry tree gave that song to the whale. Now this is a mythology, but what I discovered when I was going through my travels is all these beautiful Maori mythology actually have a basis in science and geology. So somehow these ancient people had this ability to perceive science, which we're only discovering today. And the end result of this was, I was just absolutely blown away. I ended up coming all the way back to Fjorden, and I'm sort of skipping and jumping out of the way, but I actually found, not too far from here, is a place called the Tuatapere Ranges. And the Tuatapere Ranges, believe it or not, is named after the original waka of the Waitaha people, which brought all their people of knowledge, who we should be really paying attention to, but we don't, because in our infinite wisdom of civilization, we've created an amazing world of technology where 99% of the wealth is in the hands of 1% of the population, and we have all this amazing technology which will not only wipe out whales, and in the last 10 years we've actually wiped out 200,000 whales alone, and we've actually wiped out something like 300 million in the last, globally. 200,000 in New Zealand, 200 million whales wiped out globally in 200 years. So this is a little poem, which for me summed up a lot of the spirit of this journey. And I would love to be able to pronounce the Maori pronunciation of this poem, because it is possibly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, but the English translation follows as follows. It is not a new thing. Love to the people comes from their ancestors, handed down by the passage of time. Faith and hope. Love for the people comes from their ancestors, handed down for the passage of time. The land and is the life of the people. Knowledge comes from the ancestors, handed down for the passage of time. And the theme of that story is quite simple. If you look after the land, it will look after you. If you don't, it will bite you in the ass every bloody time. From the northern, having this, I'm only giving you the tip of the iceberg. From northern, I found myself passing the game through Auckland. I got all caught up in things like John Banks trials, and I was on Vinnie Eastwood's amazing show, and I got to talk to Sam Shea. And after 4 days in Auckland, I was overstimulated, and it was a big concrete jungle, and I just wanted to get out of there. And I arrived in Taupo, which is where that poem I just read you actually comes from. And Taupo is another interesting story there, because it ties up the mythology there is between three mountains. Is the mountain of Taranaki, and the mountain of Taranaki is actually quite a unique mountain from our point locally, because the tectonic level is the same one that actually connects the mountain's peak here in Fjordland. So actually the mountain of Taranaki and the mountain Mitre Peak have a direct connection. So that's another quite interesting thing that I kept on finding, is these connections between the two. But the mountain of Taranaki included the mountain Ngāpuru, Ruapehu, and included the mountain of Pianga. It was a great love affair where they ended up at the end of the day, Taranaki realised that to bring peace to his loved one, the best thing he could do was actually to walk away. And he left this battle thinking, no, peace was the best way to achieve it. And he went down limping, crying, which formed the rivers of the Whanganui, all the way to New Plymouth. And again, another great Maori mythology which accurately describes the geology of the region, and also shows you underneath New Zealand we have the rivers, which are kind of like, if you want, the veins, but then we have all this volcanic connection which connects each of these places and provides the blood of the land, or the araha of the area. And it tells the story of Maui, which is a fish so ancient that even Maui, when coming to New Zealand, described a fish so large that he could see the fires of people cooking fires on the back of this fish. So it gives you a little indication of how ancient this land actually is. And this trip was a really amazing opportunity from first hand, from local knowledge, but also from great examples of museums that I travelled throughout to see this knowledge, which is realised actually this country is far older than we are, but our neoliberal history is all about the now. And we don't pay attention to the lessons of yesterday are the lessons that will teach us how to survive tomorrow. And I'm going to conclude. I came to Taupo and I had some amazing adventures there, which again you can read in the book. And I woke up one day and I decided it was time to go home. And I'm going to conclude with two poems. And one is a poem basically about where the importance of poetry comes from. Again, not my poetry, and I'm sure you'll recognise it. And the final poem is a little bit about my basic philosophy overall.